Montana Territory, 1878. The golden haze of sunset painted the towering mountains with strokes of amber and crimson as Katherine Montgomery dismounted from her exhausted mare. 6 days on the trail had left both rider and horse weary to the bone. The small mining settlement of Copper Ridge stretched before her, a collection of weathered buildings nestled against the mountainside like a child clinging to its mother's skirts. Katherine adjusted her riding skirt and patted the pistol secured at her waist, a necessary companion for a woman traveling alone through the untamed West. At 25, she had long abandoned the restrictive confines of Philadelphia society, trading silk gowns for practical denims and social calls for the freedom of open country. "Come along, Juniper," she murmured to her horse, leading the tired animal toward the town's only livery. "We'll find you a comfortable stall and some well-deserved feed." The settlement buzzed with the rough energy of a mining town. Prospectors, merchants, and laborers moved purposefully through the muddy main street. Several turned to stare at the sight of a woman alone, her copper hair escaping from beneath a wide-brimmed hat, leading a fine-looking horse toward Hanson's livery. "Ben riding long?" the livery owner asked, eyeing her with undisguised curiosity as she approached, his weathered face crinkled with friendly lines around the eyes. "Nearly a week," Katherine replied, her voice carrying the refined tones of her Eastern upbringing despite her trail-worn appearance. "I'm looking for Isaiah Turner." The man's eyebrows shot up beneath his cap. "The Marshal? What business you got with Turner, if you don't mind my asking?" Katherine minded very much but kept her expression neutral. "Family business," she answered tersely. "Is he in town?" "Aye, he's here all right. Lives above the Marshal's office. End of the street." The liveryman hesitated before adding, "But fair warning, miss, Turner ain't much for visitors these days." Katherine slipped in payment for Juniper's care. "Thank you for the counsel, Mr. Hanson. I'll bear it in mind." She collected her saddlebags and bedroll, leaving her rifle secured in its leather scabbard after a moment's consideration. The weight of the letter tucked inside her jacket pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step toward the Marshal's office. The 2-story clapboard building stood apart from the others, a small jail attached to its side. Katherine paused at the bottom of the wooden steps, drawing a deep breath. 6 months of searching had led her to this remote corner of the Montana Territory, to a man who might not welcome her arrival. The door swung open before she could climb the first step. A tall man filled the frame, the silver badge on his chest catching the last rays of sunlight. "You planning on standing there all evening?" His voice was deep and rough-edged, like stones tumbling down a mountainside. Katherine raised her gaze to meet eyes the color of a winter sky, clear, cold blue beneath dark brows. The man before her bore little resemblance to the smiling young soldier in the tintype photograph she carried, yet the strong line of his jaw and the distinctive scar that traced from his right temple to his cheekbone confirmed his identity. "Marshal Turner," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm Katherine Montgomery." Something flickered across his face, recognition, surprise, perhaps wariness. "Montgomery," he repeated, the name clearly holding meaning for him. His gaze swept over her, noting the quality of her clothing beneath the trail dust, the determined set of her chin, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. "You'd better come inside." The office was simply furnished: a desk, a gun rack, a wood stove, and a calendar from 1877 still hanging on the wall, despite the year having turned. A door at the back presumably led to the jail cells. A narrow staircase climbed the wall to the second floor. "I'll be direct, Marshal," Katherine said, setting down her belongings. "I'm here about Robert Montgomery." Isaiah Turner's expression hardened. He crossed to the wood stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup without offering her any. "Your husband?" "My brother." Turner paused mid-sip, his knuckles whitening around the cup. "Your brother," he repeated carefully. "Yes. The same Robert Montgomery who served with you in the 7th Cavalry." Katherine reached into her pocket and extracted the letter, worn at the folds from repeated readings. "The same man who saved your life at the Little Bighorn and then disappeared." Turner set the cup down with deliberate slowness. "Robert Montgomery died at the Little Bighorn." "That's what I believed for nearly 2 years," Katherine countered, "until this letter arrived 3 months ago." She held it out to him. "It's addressed to me but mentions you specifically." Turner made no move to take it. "What does it say?" "That he survived. That he couldn't return home because of something that happened during the battle, Something only you would understand. Katherine held his gaze steadily. It says that if I wanted answers, I should find Marshal Isaiah Turner in Copper Ridge, Montana Territory. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. My brother was declared dead by the army, Katherine continued. We held a funeral with an empty casket. If he's alive. He's not, Turner cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. Robert Montgomery died honorably. Whatever letter you received is someone's cruel joke. The handwriting is his, Katherine insisted. The personal details it contains could only be known by him. He's alive, Marshal Turner, and you know where he is. Turner moved toward the door, pulling it open. I can't help you, Miss Montgomery. The journey to Copper Ridge is dangerous this time of year. I suggest you rest the night at the boarding house and start back east tomorrow. Katherine didn't budge. I haven't come all this way to be dismissed, Marshal. I'll stay in Copper Ridge until I have answers, even if that means asking questions all over town about you and my brother. It was a bluff, but one that struck its mark. Turner's expression darkened. Stay the night at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, he said at last. We'll speak again in the morning. Sleep evaded Katherine, despite her exhaustion. The boarding house bed was soft enough after nights spent on the ground, but her mind raced with questions. Isaiah Turner's reaction had confirmed her suspicions. He knew something about Robert's fate. She rose before dawn, washed her face in the basin, and changed into her cleanest remaining clothes. Mrs. Wilson, a robust widow with sharp eyes and a kind smile, provided a hearty breakfast and gentle warnings about that somber Marshal when Katherine mentioned her purpose in town. Been here 3 years now, Mrs. Wilson said, pouring coffee. Keeps to himself mostly. Does his job well enough, but there's a shadow on that man. Lost something important in the war, I reckon. The Indian Wars? Katherine asked. Mrs. Wilson nodded. Came here after the Little Bighorn battle. Never speaks of it, but sometimes in winter when the pain in his leg gets bad, he drinks more than he should. Mutters names in his sleep, according to Doc Pearson who tends to him when the fevers come. Katherine considered this. Does the name Montgomery ever come up? The widow's eyebrows rose slightly. Can't say I've heard it. But then, I don't make it my business to collect the Marshal's nightmares. She studied Katherine with newfound interest. This Montgomery important to you? My brother, Katherine answered simply. I have reason to believe the Marshal knows what happened to him. Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. Family's worth fighting for, dear. But tread carefully with Turner. Some men carry wounds that never show on the outside. Katherine found the Marshal at the livery instead of his office, checking his horse's shoes with methodical attention. You're still here, he observed without looking up. I told you I would be. Katherine leaned against the stall door. In the morning light, she noticed the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, the lines etched around his eyes, marks of a man who had witnessed too much in his 30-some years. Miss Montgomery. Katherine, she corrected. Something like a smile tugged at his mouth. Katherine, then. What I'm about to tell you must remain between us. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Your brother didn't die at Little Bighorn. But Robert Montgomery no longer exists. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What does that mean? It means he took another name, another life. After what happened, he couldn't go back to being the man he was. What happened? Katherine pressed. Turner's jaw tightened. The kind of thing that changes a man forever. We were separated from our company, surrounded. Your brother, he hesitated. Robert made choices that kept us alive, but they weren't choices he could live with afterward. He killed someone, Katherine surmised softly. We all killed that day, Turner countered. That's what soldiers do in battle. Then what? Turner sighed deeply. It wasn't who he killed, but how, and what he discovered afterward. He met her eyes directly. I can't tell you more without betraying his confidence. Just know that your brother isn't dead, but he can't reclaim his old life either. Where is he now? Safe. Building a new life where no one asks questions about his past. Katherine felt frustration rising in her chest. That's not enough. I deserve more than that, Marshal. Our family deserves more. You deserve the truth, Turner agreed, surprising her. But I can't give it to you here. If you truly want answers, I'll take you to him. 3 days' ride from here, up in the high country. But I warn you, the man you find may not be the brother you remember. Katherine studied him, searching for deception. "Why would you do that, after trying to send me away yesterday?" Turner's weathered face showed the first genuine emotion she'd seen: regret, perhaps even guilt. "Because Robert saved more than my life that day. He saved my soul. And he's been paying for it ever since." They departed the following morning, Katherine on Juniper, Turner on his sturdy gelding. Mrs. Wilson provided provisions with knowing looks but asked no questions. The marshal had arranged for his deputy to manage town affairs during his absence. The first day passed in relative silence as they climbed steadily into the mountains, following game trails and narrow passes that Katherine would never have found on her own. Turner proved to be a competent guide, if not a talkative one. When they made camp that evening, Katherine finally broke the comfortable quiet that had settled between them. "You knew who I was the moment you saw me, didn't you?" Turner looked up from the small fire he'd built. "You have his eyes. The same Montgomery stubbornness in them, too." "He spoke of me?" "Often." Turner handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Said his little sister Katherine could outride and outshoot most men, despite her fancy education." A smile tugged at her lips. He exaggerated. "My marksmanship is adequate at best." "Yet you crossed half the country alone." "Not entirely by choice," Katherine admitted. "Our parents died 2 years ago. After Robert was declared dead, there wasn't much left for me in Philadelphia except unwanted proposals and pitying glances." Turner studied her across the flames. "So you became a wandering adventuress?" "I became myself," she corrected. "I took my inheritance and set out to see the country Robert had described in his letters. When I received that last message months ago, I finally had a purpose beyond mere wandering. Finding a brother who doesn't want to be found." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "Finding the truth, even if it's not what I hoped for." Something shifted in Turner's expression, respect, perhaps. He nodded once before turning his attention back to their simple meal. Later, as they sat watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Turner began to speak unprompted about Robert, sharing stories of their time together before the fateful battle. Katherine listened eagerly, piecing together the image of her brother's life as a soldier. By the second night, the dynamics between them had softened. Katherine found herself watching the marshal when he wasn't looking, noting the careful precision of his movements, the quiet competence with which he navigated the wilderness. There was an integrity to Isaiah Turner that she hadn't expected, a depth of character beneath his gruff exterior. When he helped her cross a particularly treacherous stream, his hand strong and steady around hers, Katherine felt a flutter of awareness that had nothing to do with her quest to find Robert. The realization both troubled and intrigued her. "We'll reach the cabin by midday tomorrow," Turner informed her as they made camp on the third evening. They had climbed high into the mountains, the air grown thin and crisp. "What should I expect?" Katherine asked, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders against the chill. Turner gazed into the flames. "A man who's been living with ghosts for 2 years. A man who wanted to protect you from the truth by staying dead." "I don't need protection," Katherine said fiercely. "I need my brother." "Even if he's changed beyond recognition?" "He's family," she stated simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps to her, it did. Turner's expression softened unexpectedly. "That kind of loyalty is rare, Katherine Montgomery." The way he said her name, soft around the edges, almost like a caress, made her breath catch. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how alone they were beneath the vast canopy of stars, how intimate this journey had become. "Tell me something, Marshal," she said, changing the subject. "Why did you stay in Copper Ridge after everything that happened? Why become the law instead of running from it?" Turner was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. "Then, after the battle, I needed structure. Rules to follow. Keeping peace in a small town seemed like atonement of sorts." "Atonement for what?" His eyes met hers, pain visible within their depths. "For surviving when better men didn't." Katherine understood then. This man carried the same burden her brother did. Survivor's guilt had shaped them both, driving one to hide in the wilderness and the other to seek redemption through service. The cabin appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, a modest structure of rough-hewn logs nestled against a stand of pines, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A small corral held 2 horses, and a neat woodpile suggested permanent habitation. Katherine's heart thundered in her chest. After 2 years of believing him dead, after months of searching, Her brother might be just yards away. Turner dismounted first, approaching the cabin with the cautious stance of a man accustomed to danger. "Wait here," he instructed, but Katherine had already slid from Juniper's back, following close behind. The cabin door opened before they reached it. A bearded man stepped onto the porch, a rifle held casually in his hands. He wore simple frontier clothing, buckskins and wool, practical for mountain living. His features were obscured by the beard and by the shadow of his hat brim, but Katherine would have known him anywhere. "Robert," she whispered, her voice catching. The rifle lowered slowly. "Katherine?" His voice was rougher than she remembered, disbelief coloring the single word. "Isaiah, what have you done?" "What needed doing?" Turner replied evenly. "She deserves the truth, Robert. She came all this way to find it." The man on the porch shook his head slowly, but his eyes never left Katherine's face. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but the words lacked conviction. Katherine moved forward, stopping at the foot of the porch steps. "Everyone believed you died at Little Bighorn. Everyone except me, after your letter came." "I never meant for you to find me," Robert said softly. "Only to know I was alive." "That's not enough for family," Katherine countered, echoing her words to Turner. "Whatever happened, whatever you did, it doesn't change who you are to me." Robert's composure cracked then, emotion flooding his features. He set the rifle aside and descended the steps, pulling Katherine into a fierce embrace that drove the breath from her lungs. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face unchecked. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I'm so sorry, Katie." Turner stood apart, giving them space for their reunion, his expression unreadable. When Robert finally released her, he turned to his former comrade with a question in his eyes. "She's as stubborn as you," Turner explained with the hint of a smile. "Threatened to turn Copper Ridge upside down looking for answers if I didn't help." Robert laughed, a rusty sound, as if long unused. "That sounds like my sister." He looked between them, noting something in their manner toward each other. "You two had quite a journey, I imagine." Katherine felt color rise in her cheeks. "The Marshal has been a perfect gentleman," she assured her brother, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. Something had grown between her and Isaiah Turner during their journey, something undefined yet undeniable. "Come inside," Robert said after a moment. "We have much to discuss." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly comfortable, a testament to Robert's intention to remain indefinitely. As twilight deepened into night, he finally shared the full story of what had happened at Little Bighorn, of the terrible choices made in the heat of battle, and of the discovery afterward that had shattered his faith in the man he'd been fighting for, Colonel Custer. "We found orders," he explained, his voice low. "Written plans that prove Custer knew the village was larger than reported, that he was deliberately provoking a fight that would further his political ambitions. He sent men to their deaths for his glory." "And you took these orders?" Katherine surmised. Robert nodded grimly. "Evidence of his recklessness, his disregard for the lives under his command. I couldn't let that stand, not after watching so many die." "But instead of exposing it, you disappeared," Katherine said, understanding dawning. "Why?" "Because the army wouldn't have thanked him for the truth," Turner interjected from his position by the fire. "They needed heroes, not whistleblowers." Robert would have been silenced, perhaps even court-martialed for theft of official documents. "So I became a deserter instead," Robert concluded. "Let them think me dead while I carried the evidence to safety." Katherine shook her head slowly. "All this time living as a ghost to protect the truth." "To protect you too," Robert added softly. "There are powerful men who would go to great lengths to keep this quiet. As long as I was dead, you were safe." The implications settled heavily between them. Katherine's presence here had changed everything, for Robert, for herself, perhaps even for Isaiah Turner, whose steady gaze she could feel across the room. "What happens now?" she asked finally. Robert exchanged a look with Turner. "That depends on what you want, Katie. You could return to Philadelphia, continue your life knowing I'm safe but maintaining the fiction of my death." "Or," she prompted. "Or you could stay," Turner said unexpectedly. All eyes turned to him. "Not here in this cabin, necessarily, but in the West, in Copper Ridge, perhaps." The suggestion hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Katherine looked between the two men who had each sacrificed in their own ways. Her brother who had abandoned his identity to preserve the truth. and the marshal who had dedicated himself to protecting others in atonement for his survival. "I left Philadelphia because there was nothing for me there," she said slowly. "I came west because I believed the truth mattered more than comfort or convention." Her eyes met Turner's. "I'm not inclined to abandon those principles now." Something like hope kindled in his gaze. Robert watched the exchange with raised eyebrows, a knowing look crossing his features. "3 days on the trail together, and already my sister and my best friend are exchanging meaningful glances," he observed dryly. "Should I be concerned, Isaiah?" Turner's mouth quirked upward. "Your sister is quite capable of making her own decisions, Robert. But if it eases your mind, my intentions are honorable." "Intentions?" Katherine echoed, her pulse quickening. "Rather presumptuous, Marshal Turner." "Not presumptuous," he corrected gently. "Hopeful." Robert laughed again, the sound coming easier this time. "It seems my resurrection has set more than one new beginning in motion." Outside, the Montana night spread its star-strewn canopy over the mountains. Inside the small cabin, 3 lives converged at a crossroads of truth and possibility. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, it held promise for them all. A chance to build something genuine from the ashes of secrets and sacrifice. Katherine Montgomery had come west seeking answers about her brother's fate. She had found those answers but also discovered something unexpected: the possibility of a future shaped by her own choices rather than convention or circumstance. As she met Isaiah Turner's steady gaze across the cabin's warm interior, she recognized that her journey had only just begun.